I don't know about you, but I'm a huge fan of the Olympics. Winter Olympics, Summer Olympics, outside of a few random events, I love almost all of it. I feel like the epicenter of the entire experience is the Summer Olympics track and field. It's a big deal, and as someone who ran track in high school, it gives me a chance to brag to my kids about my glory days, although my kids aren't really interested and there isn't actually much to brag about. One event that I definitely didn't compete in back in high school was the high jump. I really wanted to, but the problem was that I couldn't jump very high, and that's kind of the point. There were, however, a couple of guys and girls on my track team who were pretty good at it. They all used the same technique. In fact, every one of their opponents used it too, and I'd be willing to bet that none of them knew the name of it: the Fosbury flop. This technique originated all the way back in 1968 when a guy named Dick Fosbury won the gold medal in the high jump at the Mexico City Summer Olympics. And overnight, he became front page news because of his technique. Prior to that moment, athletes used other techniques for the high jump, like the Western roll or the Eastern cutoff, which sounds painful. But once Dick Fosbury debuted that approach, it became the standard technique that all Olympic athletes now use. In that moment, Fosbury was countercultural. He went against the grain. He high jumped in a way that was opposite of everyone around him. And that idea is what we're talking about in this series. Because like Fosbury, Jesus was countercultural as well. When he walked the earth, he often said and did things that were the exact opposite of what anyone expected. He would take ideas that everyone agreed with, and then he'd flip them upside down and tell people to do the exact opposite. But the catch with Jesus was that these new directives were always to the benefit of other people. His countercultural ways always centered around loving others. So for the next few weeks, we're going to look at some of those countercultural ideas and talk about how they're still turning things upside down today in the best possible way. And we're going to ask ourselves, how can we take Jesus's lead and follow his countercultural example? Something that was not countercultural back then was people looking out for themselves. They thought about themselves, cared about themselves, and took care of themselves first. And when you think about it, that's still pretty normal today. Most people spend most of their time thinking about themselves. This isn't a knock on anyone, it just seems to be our instinct. If someone were to track our thoughts throughout the week, a majority of them would probably be about us. Even when we're thinking about our kids and our spouse, it still comes back to us, doesn't it? We often want to improve something for them, assuming that in turn it will improve things for us. And no one had to teach us to prioritize ourselves. We've been good at it our entire lives. And this makes sense because no one is going to spend more time with you than you. Everywhere you go, there you are. You think about you at home, you think about you at work, and you also think about you here at church. But we don't ever want to lose perspective and forget the people who aren't us. Because you and I are surrounded by people who are struggling. We interact with them on a daily basis and may not even realize that they're hurting. We pass by people every day who are lonely. They go unnoticed and they're desperate for authentic connection even though they may not even realize it. There are people around us who are sick, afraid, insecure, and anxious. When our thoughts naturally go to us, it takes work for us to think about them. But it's important for us to develop this muscle. Why? Well, let's look at our first countercultural idea to answer that question. When Jesus was on earth, he was followed around by a lot of people. Everywhere he went, there was usually a crowd behind him. But it seems like there were two main groups who were always around him. First, the religious leaders. These were also known as the Pharisees and Sadducees. They were the well-behaved church leaders. They were the good people who followed the rules. They were usually annoyed by Jesus because people were following him and not them. They also wanted him to spend less time around group number two, who were the outcasts. Some of these people were outcasts because of their physical ailments, and they were around Jesus because there was a chance that he could heal them. And some of them were outcasts because they were the so-called sinners. They were broken, and everybody knew it. They loved Jesus because he liked them, and they hung out with Jesus because he was easy to hang out with. In one of the gospel accounts of Jesus' life in the New Testament, we see an interesting interaction with both groups. We find this moment in the book of Luke. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." The religious people were annoyed because Jesus showed acceptance to the sinners. The sinners were not following the religious rules. So Jesus had the religious leaders on one side and the sinners on the other. And he had something that he wanted both of them to hear. So Jesus told them the story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? Upon hearing this hypothetical, both sides probably thought, no? To the people in the audience, this was completely countercultural. You don't leave 99 sheep open to the possibility of being attacked or wandering off, especially if it was your job to shepherd them. This was an irresponsible decision. And then Jesus continued, "And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders." So Jesus said, when this guy found his sheep, he lectured it for wandering off? No. He got angry and yelled at the sheep, "Do you realize that I had to leave 99 other sheep to come after you?" Nope. He acted exhausted and completely worn out from running after the lost sheep? No. He will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. Whether you feel like you relate with the well-behaved religious leaders or the outcasts and sinners, all of us have moments when we feel insecure, overlooked, and insignificant. Jesus doesn't just go after us, he joyfully carries us. Isn't that amazing? If you ever wonder how God feels about you, here Jesus revealed the heart of God. He always goes after you. If you feel far away from God right now, maybe today is the day you let him pick you up and put you on his shoulders. Jesus continues, when he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors saying, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. The man rejoiced because he found a sheep. He celebrated with his friends. In the same way, heaven throws a party when one person decides to place their trust in and follow Jesus. And this is because culture looks at the crowd, but Jesus looks at the one. When everyone else would have stayed with the 99, Jesus went countercultural and let us know that he not only goes after the one, he's ecstatic when he finds him or her. To further illustrate, Jesus added one more story. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she will call in her friends and neighbors and say, "Rejoice with me because I have found my lost coin." In the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. In other words, just like the lady was lighting a lamp, sweeping the house, and looking carefully for the coin, Jesus is going after people who need him. We mean that much to him. And when he finds them, he says there is joy in the presence of God's angels. Now that's a big deal. Time after time, Jesus noticed the one. In the middle of a crowd, Jesus noticed one disabled man and healed him. In the middle of a crowd, Jesus noticed a bleeding woman who touched his robe and healed her. In the middle of a crowd, Jesus noticed Zacchaeus and invited him to lunch. Jesus noticed and then he moved. His love for the one was big, and it showed by the way that he acted. In light of what we talked about today, there are two countercultural things that I'd love for us to do. First, notice people. Look at the one. In a world where we're busy, distracted, and focused on our stuff, this can be difficult to do. And it's not because we don't care or we're not nice. No, it's simply because it doesn't cross our minds. We're focused on things like picking up the kids, planning dinner, and hitting work deadlines. This is all important stuff. But with your mind always racing toward the next thing, it's easy to speed past people without even noticing what they're going through. Listen, we have no idea what people are struggling with. We have no idea who we pass, who could simply use a smile or an encouraging word. Even more than that, we have no idea who could use a listening ear or someone to care about them or pray for them. I remember a time when I met up with some friends for dinner and trivia at a local restaurant. And after it was over, I asked the table a thought-provoking question. It wasn't overly intense, but it was deeper than the average trivia conversation. I was amazed by how the conversation led to more conversation, and people slowly opened up and showed honesty and vulnerability. I realized that 1, people are starving for authentic connection, and 2, everyone's dealing with stuff. Everyone. Okay, and once we notice people, we can show them compassion. Once you notice the one, move toward the one. Listen to people, pray for them, do what you can to serve them and care for them. Ask God to help you truly notice them and see them. If you get the opportunity to pray out loud for someone, do it. If you get the opportunity to invite someone to church, do it. There are people around you who desperately need the hope of Jesus in their lives. Jesus says there's rejoicing in heaven when someone turns toward him. You could be the catalyst to help someone do that very thing. In a world that's all about the masses, groups, and followers, Jesus invites us to notice individuals. Culture looks at the crowd, but Jesus looks at the one. Jesus notices people and moves towards them, and he also notices you and I. In those moments when we feel insecure, overlooked, and insignificant, Jesus doesn't just go after us, he also joyfully carries us. We can follow his example. It was countercultural back then, and it's still countercultural today.